My name is Cassie Monroe, and until last fall, I believed our little house on Primrose Avenue was the safest place I knew. We had a swing on the maple tree out front that my husband Ethan hung the week we moved in, and a dent in the living room wall where we once tried to assemble a bookcase without instructions. I'm 30, work as a high school counselor, and make lists for everything, even feelings. 3 sticky notes lived on our fridge like roommates: groceries, fix the hallway light, and remember to breathe. When my younger sister Sophie called from a parking lot in the rain, I didn't think about boundaries. I thought about the way she used to braid my hair before school and how she cried when our dad missed her piano recital. She said she had a breakup, that her lease was ending, and that she just needed a soft place to land for a few weeks. I said yes before Ethan even got home. I said yes because family feels like a reflex you can't unlearn. Sophie arrived with 2 suitcases and a glossy smile that never quite reached her eyes. She brought chai mix, a plant she named Gemma, and a candle that made the whole house smell like oranges dipped in sugar. On her first night, she stood in our kitchen, hips against the counter, and said, "I can babysit your marriage while I'm here. I'm excellent with pets and husbands." Ethan laughed. I did too, because it sounded like a joke, and because laughing is cheaper than worrying. The first week was fine. Better than fine. Sophie folded our laundry into the kind of rectangles only people with YouTube channels can manage, and Ethan offered to drive her to job interviews. They came back with inside jokes and cups of iced coffees sweating through their paper sleeves. He called her Soph, the way I do, and she called him E. It was close. It was friendly. It was nothing. I told myself it was nothing. Small things pricked. Ethan started showering at odd hours, late at night, or right when he got home from a long day. Sophie borrowed my blue cardigan and returned it warm, as if it had spent time on someone's back rather than a chair. One evening, I found Ethan's watch on the guest room dresser, his name engraved on the back, a gift from me 2 Christmases ago. "I tried it on," she said easily, slipping it into his palm with a little flourish. I wanted to see how heavy it felt. She looked at me when she said it, then smiled, and I smiled back because a good sister doesn't make a small thing into a big one.
2 weeks after Sophie moved in, the school nurse called me to her office and handed me a pregnancy test. Not for a student, for me. "You've been twirling your hair and eating saltines," she said kindly. "Either you're nervous or you're me at 27. The strip turned into 2 lines while I was still trying to remember how to breathe without a sticky note. I looked at my hands and thought of tiny socks. My entire chest became a bell, somewhere between joy and terror. I stopped at a little baby boutique on the way home and bought a pair of yellow booties I couldn't afford. I planned a movie night reveal: popcorn, lemonade, an old comedy we'd watched on our first date, and the booties in a box under the couch. But when I walked in, Ethan and Sophie were in the kitchen, faces close enough to be a rumor, whispering. They leaped apart when the door closed and offered me matching smiles. "Big day?" Ethan asked, too bright. "Yeah," I said, and set the bag down like it might explode. "Huge." He kissed my forehead and grabbed his keys. "I told Soph I'd take her to look at a Craigslist dresser," he said. "Back soon." Sophie winked and said, "Don't wait up if we get lost in the maze of suburbia." The front door closed. The house exhaled. I put the box with the booties on the shelf in the hall closet behind the extra blankets, because sometimes you have to hide the good thing to keep it safe from the bad feeling. A few days later, I noticed a charge on our credit card from a boutique I didn't recognize, Luminaire Lingerie, after Ethan told me he was at the gym. I asked him about it to be sure. "Last-minute gift for you," he said, kissing the side of my head. "Surprise ruined." But no package arrived. When I mentioned it again, he said, "Delivery delay," and changed the subject to Sophie's job hunt. The day I found the hotel receipt, I wasn't looking for anything. I was hunting for tape in the junk drawer and came up with a folded square, the Highlander Inn. 2 guests, 1 night, paid in cash. My heart fell through the floor. I pivoted from panic to denial. Hotel paper is generic. Maybe it was from a conference. Maybe it fell into our drawer through a crack in the space-time continuum. I put it back and shut the drawer. Then I opened it and took it out again because I've never been good at pretending I don't know what I know.
Fear and panic. I confronted Ethan that night with the receipt in my hand. He didn't look surprised. He looked tired, like a man bracing for weather. "Cassie," he said softly, "I met a client at the bar there. We grabbed a room to take calls because the lobby was loud." "A room?" I repeated. He held up his hands. 2 hours. Then I came home. Ask Sophie. I dropped her here before I went. He used her name like a shield. I realized our house had a new triangle inside it, and one of the corners had always belonged to me. I wanted to tell him about the baby, right then, right there, to anchor him to us with the truth. Instead, I said nothing because sudden honesty felt like handing him a rope he could pull. At 3 a.m., I threw up into the guest bathroom sink and cried without sound so the walls wouldn't learn my secrets. The next morning, Sophie made pancakes shaped like hearts and kissed my cheek. "You look pale," she said, flipping a cake like a TV chef. "You should take your vitamins. Women are fragile." "I'm not fragile," I said, and she laughed. "Of course not. You're Cassie." She set a plate in front of Ethan with a flourish that made my teeth hurt. I started keeping score in a notebook I hid in my school bag. Wednesday, Sophie and Ethan's hoodie, cold. Friday, laundry charge number 2. Sunday, Ethan's cologne in the guest room, not on the nightstand, on the pillowcase. Monday, Sophie's lipstick on a glass in our bedroom trash. Tiny things, stupid things, except that I am a counselor, and I know how tiny things make a pattern. When I finally told Ethan about the pregnancy, he sat down hard on the arm of the couch and stared at the floor. He took too long to speak, the way a person does when they're translating their real answer into the version that keeps the world from burning. "Wow," he said finally, without looking at me. "That's big." "Big good?" I asked. He stood and hugged me with his chin. "Big complicated," he murmured. Then he pulled away and went to get air on the porch, where Sophie had been watering Gemma. I heard their voices, thin, sharp lines I couldn't make out, and the sound of a lighter flicking, though neither of them smokes. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I am proud of the part of me that decided to survive. I bought a nanny cam that looked like a succulent. I placed it on the bookshelf in the living room where Gemma could watch over it like a friend. I told myself I would never look at the footage because that would make me into a person I didn't want to be. 2 nights later, I looked. At 12:11 a.m., the door from the hallway opened, and Ethan stepped into the living room in the t-shirt I sleep in on Saturdays. Sophie followed in my blue cardigan. They stood too close for siblings-in-law, laughing in murmurs that sounded like piano keys pressed with fingertips. Ethan said, "She'll forgive me." Sophie said, "She always forgives you. That's why you chose her." He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. They disappeared down the hall toward the guest room together, backs brushing like a secret you wear. I closed the laptop and made a sound I had never heard come from my own body. It wasn't a sob. It was the sound trees make when they crack in winter. A long, quiet breaking that keeps going after the visible part is over. I thought, I'm going to be someone's mother. I thought, I'm not going to let this be the story he tells about me. The next morning, I went to school early and printed the frames that mattered. The distance between them, the hand, the hallway. I also printed bank statements that showed small transfers Ethan had made from our joint account into a new one labeled EM Partners LLC. He had always wanted to flip houses with his friend Mark, a dream I had called cute, the way people call raccoons cute until they're in the kitchen. The LLC paperwork listed 3 managers, Ethan Hale, Mark Peters, and Sophie Monroe. I pressed my palms to the printer glass and thought I might pass out. At lunch, I called my mother. I didn't say the whole thing. I didn't say, your favorite daughter is sleeping with my husband, because I didn't know how to be that blunt and still be her child. I said, things are complicated with Ethan. And she said, men are complicated. And I remembered being 12 and telling her Sophie had taken my sweater, and her saying, let her have it, she wears color better than you. It has taken me 30 years to learn this sentence. Not everything taken should be given.
I made a plan. I invited everyone to my mom's for her 63rd birthday dinner on Sunday. Ethan, Sophie, Mom, Mark and his wife, and even our neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, who doesn't miss a chance to say grace. I told Ethan I wanted to celebrate the little things. He hugged me hard, almost tender. Sophie offered to bring cake. "Lemon, like your wedding," she said, and I smiled like a woman about to applaud at the end of the play. On Saturday night, I moved the succulent camera to my purse and slid my phone into record before I walked into the guest room. Ethan was inside, zipping a bag. Sophie sat on the bed cross-legged, tapping on her phone. "Where are you going?" I asked. Ethan didn't look at me. He said, "Mark's Lake Place. We need to go over the EM Partners plan." "What does the E stand for?" He blinked. "Ethan, what about the M?" "Mark." "And the partners?" I asked, turning to Sophie. She smiled and said, "Family." I said, "I'm pregnant." Sophie's smile faltered. Ethan's hands stilled. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was inside my own life and not watching someone else wear it. I told him, "You can still be a good brother-in-law. You can even be a good father. But you cannot be both those things and a liar." He opened his mouth. Whatever he was going to say drowned in the sound of my phone pinging, the nanny cam alert from the living room, motion detected. Mark had let himself in with the spare key we kept in the ugly frog planter on the porch. He crossed the room to the bookshelf, took Gemma down, twisted her pot, and removed the SD card from the fake succulent. He called down the hall, "We have a problem. Your wife is smarter than you said." Sophie stood up. She told Mark, "Give it," voice low and controlled. He flipped the card like a coin and handed it to her. I held out my palm. "That's mine." She popped it into her mouth and swallowed. I didn't know what to do. So I did what counselors tell students to do when the hallway turns dangerous. I walked toward the noise and into the light. I took the frog planter, smashed it on the porch, and held up the spare key like proof of a mistake I would never make again. "Tomorrow, we're going to Mom's. All of us. And you're going to hear me." That night, I slept at Mrs. Alvarez's with her granddaughter's stuffed llama under my arm. The baby kicked for the first time, a soft fish flick in the dark, and I cried the kind of cry that rinses you clean enough to try again. Sunday afternoon smelled like roast chicken and lemon frosting and the warm dust of old family photos. Mom fussed with the good plates and asked Sophie to slice the cake. Ethan stood by the window, hands in pockets, pretending not to be a man caught between two fires he set himself. Mark arrived late with a bottle of wine and apologies that sounded practiced. Mrs. Alvarez brought a prayer and a smile sharp enough to cut rope. I waited until everyone's plate held something they liked. Then I stood and said, "Before we eat, I want to say a few things." My voice shook once and then found its legs. "I'm pregnant." Mom clapped. Sophie blinked. Ethan looked at the floor. "And Ethan and Sophie are in love," I added calmly, not to accuse, but to sort the facts into the room where they belonged. Mom made a sound like a tea kettle. "Cassie," she said, warning wrapped in worry. "It's true," I said, placing the printed frames on the table like fragile plates. "They've been together. They've started a company with Mark that uses our marital funds. They've tried to move money without my consent, and last night Sophie swallowed the memory card from a camera in my living room." Mrs. Alvarez crossed herself and then reached over to squeeze my hand. Mark tried to laugh. Ethan did that thing men do where they become air. Less visible, less solid. Sophie set the knife down very carefully, as if it might misunderstand. "Cassie," she said softly, "you've always been dramatic." "I've always been generous," I corrected. "There's a difference." I turned to Mom. "You taught us to keep peace by making me small. I won't be small anymore." Mom's eyes filled. "I wanted you to be kind," she whispered. "I am," I said. "This is kindness. It just doesn't look like silence." Ethan finally spoke. "We didn't mean to hurt you," he said. "It just happened. Hotels don't just happen. LLCs don't just happen. Choosing my sister doesn't just happen." Sophie squared her shoulders. "I'm late," she said. "I'm probably pregnant too." The words landed like grenades. My mother gasped, Ethan flinched, Mark mouthed, "Wow." I took a breath. "If you are," I said, I hope you both become better people before that child meets you." Then I took the envelope I'd prepared and slid it to Ethan. Inside, copies of our bank transfers, the LLC paperwork, and a letter from a lawyer Claire at my school recommended, the kind with a voice that makes men sit up straight. I said, "You'll both be served tomorrow. I filed for legal separation and a financial injunction. The house is in my name, not yours, Ethan. You insisted on that once, remember, when your credit wasn't great? I've changed the locks. Sophie, you have 24 hours to remove your things under supervision. Mark, if you step on our property again without notice, I'll call the police." Sophie's face did something I'd never seen before. It showed the little girl underneath the shiny grown-up shell, the one who watched me get the bigger slice because I was older, and who learned to take extra when no one was looking. For a second, I wanted to hug her. Then I remembered the hallway and the hand and the swallowed card. Mom murmured, "Family," like a spell to make a house stand back up after an earthquake. "No," I said gently. "Family is what you protect, not what you pillage." Mrs. Alvarez said grace then, not because the food needed blessing, but because the room did. She thanks God for truth, for babies who deserve better stories, for women who learn to speak without asking permission. When she finished, no one lifted a fork. Ethan put both hands on the back of his chair and stared at the window like a man looking for exits. Sophie moved first. She reached for the cake knife again, sliced a perfect wedge, and placed it on a plate in front of me. "Lemon," she said, voice shaking, "like your wedding." "I know." And I didn't touch it.
The next days felt like paperwork dressed up as time. There were forms with lines for things I didn't want to name and boxes that asked when a marriage ends, as if it could be pinned to an hour. Claire, the lawyer, spoke gently and carried a binder with my name on it and the strength of a small army. She filed motions, she froze accounts, she made EM Partners LLC look smaller than the space it had taken in my chest. Sophie texted me a photo of a pregnancy test with a single line and the caption, "False alarm." I stared until the line felt like a crack in a wall I no longer wanted to live behind. Ethan sent 3 emails with subject lines that pretended we were colleagues. RE property, RE next steps, RE friendly resolution. I forwarded them to Claire and put my phone in a drawer with the measuring cups. At night, the baby kicked hard, as if to remind me that movement is a kind of answer. I lay on my side, pressed a hand to the place a foot met palm, and told the dark a story about a porch swing. Not the old one, but a new one we would build. Me and a handful of women with drills and laughter. I wasn't okay, but I was not alone. And that is a kind of okay you can live on.
Sophie didn't move out in 24 hours. She moved out in 14, dragging it the way people do when they think you'll change your mind if they make enough noise. Claire arranged a deputy to keep the peace while she packed, and Mrs. Alvarez watered Gemma without comment, like a woman who knows plants can survive new pots. Ethan stayed away, which was both a relief and an insult. He let her do the heavy lifting while he crafted the narrative from a safe distance. On her last day, Sophie left a note on the kitchen table in a script that looked like mine if it had learned to flirt. "You made me into the villain because it makes your story easier," it read, "but you were never as good as you pretended. You hoarded love and called it maturity. You wanted a pet, not a sister." I folded the note into a square and tucked it behind the lemon extract in the pantry. I didn't have a speech for her. I had a list. Therapy appointments, birth class, a grocery budget that didn't include 2 people planning a lake house. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from the court. Temporary orders granted in my favor, accounts frozen pending division, exclusive use of the residence to me and any minor child. Claire sent a thumbs-up emoji and a message, "We build from here." Ethan called the next day for the first time in weeks, his voice suddenly soft, as if the microphone itself insisted on manners. "We could still fix this," he said. "We don't have to be enemies." "We aren't," I said. "Enemies care more about each other than we do." He was quiet. Then he said, and didn't finish.
Men like Ethan rarely do the gerund of apology. They like the idea of the thing, not the work. The day of the first hearing, Sophie arrived in a white dress that would have looked innocent if I didn't know about hotel receipts. My mother sat between us like a human cease and desist. When the judge asked if there was any chance of reconciliation, I looked at the floor where the scuff marks made a constellation and said, "Only with myself." The courtroom air changed. Even the bailiff looked at me with something like respect. Mark took the stand in a later session and tried to make EM Partners sound like a TED Talk. Claire turned it into a pop quiz he hadn't studied for. Who authorized the transfer on April 12th? What is the source of capital listed as CM Homehold? Do you have written consent from Ms. Monroe for the movement of those funds? He stammered, he glared, he finally answered, "Ethan." Afterward, in the hallway, Sophie asked if I wanted to get coffee. We're already at the cafe near Mom's, as if geography were friendship. I said no. She said, "You're so good at no now," like it was an insult. I took it as a compliment.
On a Tuesday in May, a month before my due date, someone rattled my doorknob at midnight. I grabbed the bat the softball team gave me when I left coaching and stood in the hallway, heart drumming loud enough to wake the photos on the wall. The people showed a blur: hat, hoodie, impotence. I called 911 with my voice low and steady because counselors practice calm for a living. The person left before the car arrived. The officer checked the camera footage and raised an eyebrow. "Recognize him?" he asked. It was Mark. He changed the plates on his truck with tape. The camera caught the edge of his license beneath the fake number. I texted Claire, who texted Park, who texted Mark's lawyer, who texted Mark, who texted me an apology that wasn't one. Thought Ethan still lived there, got the days wrong. The next afternoon, Mrs. Alvarez found a package on my porch addressed to Baby Hale. Inside, a knitted blue cardigan identical to the one Sophie borrowed that first week, with a note, "We can still be a family." I wanted to burn it on the front lawn and roast marshmallows over the pieces. Instead, I put it in a box labeled Evidence and called Park. That night, the baby rolled and then went still in a way that made my throat close. I lay on the floor with my phone timer counting kicks like a metronome. 10 minutes, 20, nothing. By the time the ambulance lights painted our ceiling red, I had invented an entire life and a loss too heavy to lift. In the ER, a nurse with lavender nails found the heartbeat, steady, stubborn, and I cried in a way that scared me with its volume. I texted Ethan from the hospital bed because it felt like the right thing and the last thing. "Baby, okay. We're okay. Please stop making us not okay." He replied, "I'm glad," which is not the same as "I'm sorry" and never will be.
My daughter arrived on a Tuesday in June during a thunderstorm that rinsed our street clean. She came with a full-body wail and a fist like a punctuation mark. I named her June because I wanted a word that sounded like beginning. My mother held her and cried. Mrs. Alvarez brought a casserole that could feed a small army or one very tired new mother for a week. Maya from work knitted a hat that looked like a strawberry and said, "You did the bravest thing. You stayed in your own life." Ethan met June in a supervised visit at a community center with a mural of handprints on the wall. He held her like glass. He said, "She's beautiful." And for a second, I saw the man who had hung our swing. The facilitator asked if we wanted a photo for the child's file, and I said yes, because someday she will ask, and I want to hand her proof that people tried. The divorce took 6 months, which is fast for a life. Claire negotiated terms that protected June and the house and the part of me that refuses to be collateral. EM Partners dissolved into a stack of fees and a lesson Mark will tell other men in bars when they talk about getting theirs. Sophie moved to a different city. She sent a postcard with a skyline and the words, "I'm working on myself," printed like a caption. I didn't write back. Maybe someday I will. Maybe boundaries are letters you send later. I still have the yellow booties I bought the day the lines turned pink.
They live on June's dresser next to Gemma, who survived all of it with better grace than any of us. Sometimes, when the baby sleeps and the house is quiet in the way I used to dream of, I swing on the porch and look at the dent in the wall through the window and think how we tried that bookcase 3 times before getting it right. The ending isn't clean. Endings rarely are, but it's mine. And so is the beginning I'm writing each morning when June wakes me before the sun, demanding a world where love doesn't lie. I used to arrange my life into lists to feel safe. Now I keep one list on the fridge. Groceries, fix the hallway light, and in my handwriting that is finally only mine, remember to breathe. I do.
After June was born, the days blurred into cycles of feeding, changing, and trying to remember when I had last eaten something besides crackers. The house smelled of baby powder and laundry detergent, the good kind, the kind that made me feel like I was keeping some control. Every sound felt amplified. Her cries, the creak of the floorboards, the mail slot clapping shut when letters dropped inside. I told myself each sound was just the house talking to me, telling me it was still standing, even if I wasn't sure I was. Mom came by often, sometimes too often. She'd hover, rearranging the baby clothes into piles by color, and sigh when I didn't fold them the way she thought I should. "You're strong," she would say, but in a tone that suggested I wasn't strong enough. I knew she meant well, but after everything with Sophie and Ethan, even kindness felt like a critique. It was a Tuesday when I opened the mailbox and found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a photograph of me holding June on the porch swing. I froze, staring at the glossy print. It had been taken from across the street, angled through the branches of the maple tree. My first thought was Ethan. My second was Sophie. My third was a cold emptiness, because I realized it could be anyone. I showed it to Detective Park when I went to file my weekly report updates. He frowned, tapping the edge of the photo against the desk. "Could be intimidation, could be surveillance. We'll check the neighbors' cameras." He handed the photo back to me in a clear evidence sleeve. "Keep it safe. If there's more, call me immediately." That night, I lay awake with June's bassinet next to the bed, my ears straining for every outside noise. Around 2 a.m., I heard a car door slam. I crept to the window, heart in my throat, but saw nothing but the wet shine of the streetlights. I hated how fear made me a shadow in my own home. Fear and panic. It was a Tuesday when I opened the mailbox and found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a photograph of me holding June on the porch swing. I froze, staring at the glossy print. It had been taken from across the street, ambled through the branches of the maple tree. My first thought was Ethan. My second was Sophie. My third was a cold emptiness, because I realized it could be anyone. I showed it to Detective Park when I went to file my weekly report updates. He frowned, tapping the edge of the photo against the desk. "Could be intimidation, could be surveillance. We'll check the neighbors' cameras." He handed the photo back to me in a clear evidence sleeve. "Keep it safe. If there's more, call me immediately." That night, I lay awake with June's bassinet next to the bed, my ears straining for every outside noise. Around 2 a.m., I heard a car door slam. I crept to the window, heart in my throat, but saw nothing but the wet shine of the streetlights. I hated how fear made me a shadow in my own home. 2 days later, another envelope came. This time, it wasn't a photo. It was one of my old high school essays, the kind my mom had kept in a folder in her attic. On the first page, in handwriting I knew as well as my own, were the words, "You always thought you were better." My stomach flipped. Sophie,
It had to be. I called her number even though I had sworn not to. It rang twice before her voice came on, too calm. "Cassie?" "I don't know what you mean," she said, and I could hear the clink of a spoon in a mug, like she was making tea while dismantling my sanity. "You came into my life, into my house, and you—" My voice broke. "I just wanted what you had," she said softly. "Is that so unforgivable?" The line went dead. I held June closer that night, whispering promises I didn't know how to keep. I swore no one would take her from me, that no one would rewrite her story the way Sophie tried to rewrite mine. But fear makes promises feel like paper shields. The next evening, I came home from the grocery store to find the front door ajar. My chest went cold. I pushed it open slowly, clutching my keys between my fingers like claws. The living room looked normal, too normal. The baby's blanket had been folded differently. The candle Sophie had left behind months ago, the orange sugar one, sat on the counter. It hadn't been there in weeks. I called Detective Park, and within 15 minutes, 2 officers were combing the house. "No signs of forced entry," one said. "Do you have a spare key missing?" I remembered the frog planter, the way Sophie had once laughed, calling it the dumbest hiding spot ever. She knew. She had always known. That night, I packed a go bag for June and me. Diapers, formula, the yellow booties, and the birth certificate. I placed it by the door like an insurance policy. I never wanted my life to be about defense. I wanted it to be about building. Classrooms, stories, family. But sometimes surviving is the only kind of building you can do. I stood at the window, watching the street where headlights passed like strangers with secrets, and whispered to June, "You will grow up knowing what family means. Not what they told me it was, what it really is. Safe, chosen, honest." I kissed her forehead and tried to believe my own words. Because if I didn't, everything that had broken me would find a way to break her too.